Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you. Nazira, just to make sure, am I audible?
Yes, you are. We can all hear you.
Great, fantastic. So we won't be presenting anything in terms of a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to engage some of our authors and a student around issues of student-centeredness. So we were invited to come and talk to you today. Myself and Tsepiso, along with our colleagues Greg Kroll and Fiona McAllister, co-edited a book that was published earlier this year, and I will put a link to that in the chat. It's an open access resource. And the book is titled Towards Reimagining South African Higher Education Towards a Student-Centered Learning and Teaching Future. So the idea was born from we won the Vice Chancellor's Team Teaching Award in 2021. We got a grant and we decided we wanted to contribute in some way to the scholarship of student success. And this book, that's the idea for the book, was born from that. And we'll be engaging today with 3 authors, and we've got some more of the authors in the virtual space who contributed chapters. And there's also a student from our faculty, and we'll hear her voice as well. We had invited a postgrad student who could unfortunately not make it, as they have a workshop today. So in terms of the panel, when I'm done with the intro, I'm going to hand over to Tsepiso, and she'll be posing a question to each of the panel members, who will be the primary respondents. And then thereafter, the other panel members will come in and they'll be able to share their ideas. So we'll do that about 4 times, different questions to different panel members. And then we're going to open up to the room, and you're very welcome to engage with the panel around questions or ideas that you have. You're also welcome to use the chat. I do think we have someone managing that. And then at the end, we'll just kind of highlight the most salient points. Before I start, I think it's important to address this issue of student-centeredness. Now, I must admit, I'm on sabbatical at the moment. I could not attend yesterday's session, and I'm sure it was quite enriching. Student-centeredness in the literature can be contested. And in chapter 13, myself, Tsepiso, Greg, and Fiona address this at length. So you're welcome to go and download the book and engage with that, as well as the other chapters. This idea of student-centeredness, learning-centeredness, whether it's within teaching and learning spaces, whether it's within the curriculum, or whether it's more broadly within the institution. So we do grapple with that, and we wanted to make that clear up front that we're quite aware of it. And you'll see that in the various chapters, this idea of student-centeredness is approached in very different ways. But okay, I'm going to ask Tsepiso to come in and hand over to her. The other people in the room is Lynn Hewlett, Richard Cook, Christine Hobden, and Natisha, sorry, Natisha, I can't remember your surname, Natisha Chetty, who is our student. So Tsepiso, over to you.
Thank you, Donnie. I hope I'm audible.
You are,
I know
thanks.
I'm a little blurry. I think it's got to do with my camera settings, and I apologize for that. So I'm just going to jump right in. Thank you, Donnie, for giving us the background. And I will start by posing the first question, and I would like to pose it to Lynn Hewlett. So in thinking about your chapter, how did you approach improving the student learning experience or nurturing student success?
Okay, thanks very much, and welcome everybody, and good to be with you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief background to the chapter, very briefly, just to contextualize the comments that I'm going to make about the student learning experience. And I think I just need to emphasize, in our case, it's the student learning experience in order to help them develop their own professional practice. Because they are teachers in training. They are third-year B.Ed students. My colleague Laura Dyson's in the room, so if I'll give Laura a chance to come in later. What our chapter deals with is how we had to very rapidly, like most of you, get a course that was entirely face-to-face into online delivery for COVID under emergency conditions. So when we talk about issues of student success, we talk about successful under the circumstances because that's what it was. And this is for teachers who are third-year teachers. We teach them the principles of assessment, and the real focus of our intervention is on saying that assessment is not only about assessment of learning. in other words, the final results, but also what you learn through assessment in the process of assessment as learning and learning through assessment. So that's our key focus. So we very consciously had to try and model that in the face-to-face version and then figure out how on earth we were going to do that in the emergency online version. So what we learned from that process, which I think is important for all developers of courses for students, is that in a way it wasn't the rapid change to technology, much as we had to all learn very quickly how to put stuff online with very little support at the time. What for us we were able to draw on in order to do what we call a successful under the circumstances course was to go back to our particular learning histories and trajectories as professionals. And in our case, both of us, it's adult learning, it's English language teaching, it's academic literacies, and it was once upon a time designing distance education learning materials. And from those, we were able to pull three very explicit principles that we think underlie all of that, that enabled us to engage with student learning experiences and the social aspects of teaching. One of those was the principle of explicitness. And here we go in and we draw on Basil Bernstein, particularly explicit pedagogy. And that was paying much more attention to elaborating on the explicit rules that make for student success, that are often implicit in our pedagogies. We often hear even ourselves and our colleagues going, they should know how to do this. Why should we have to explain this again? So it was that principle of explicit pedagogies, and that led us to much shorter lecture inputs, much more explicit modeling of assessment practices that we wanted to see, much more attention to preempting misunderstandings rather than waiting for them to happen, and much more explicit scaffolding and elaboration of what a quality contribution looks like. Secondly, the other key principle here was extending our use of authentic activities that we had already engaged in previous courses. In this case, looking much more at analyses of actual actual teacher assessment practices and getting students to analyze those assessment practices and to get them to analyze our own assessment practices and the meta discourse of why we were assessing in the way that we were assessing and how we were assessing. The third key principle was dialogic feedback. And how we use dialogic feedback in our own professional practice, and also giving students much more opportunity to do so in terms of strengthening their own practices of feedback, both giving themselves feedback as well as giving their peers feedback. As you can see, really, really keen for professional practice, all of us who train professionals. So what did we learn from this emergency intervention that we tried to take forward and we think has to be taken forward? Now, these are some of the challenges, but they are also potentially some of the issues that it raises for us. And I like the comment earlier from Nicole about policy and in some cases challenging policy and working with policy. The first one is that we cannot assume that all students are able to study independently. And blended and online modes increasingly put more emphasis on an assumption of independent study. Many of our students, and I'm talking education students, have experienced very little face-to-face modeling of how to study independently in their prior schooling experiences. We have to be much more explicit about expectations, and we have to be much more explicit about how they demonstrate those expectations. We also need to much more explicitly design for teaching feedback literacy and legitimating practices of peer feedback beyond just the boxes to be ticked by doing an online peer review. And then finally, we have to really be careful of the fact that in large undergraduate classes, the interaction is increasingly with tutors and not with experienced teachers. So for our teachers, this is absolutely key because this is the modeling of good teaching practices or otherwise that they are getting. It's from these tutors, whether it be online or whether it be face-to-face. And what we've realized is the training, the time to interact with the tutors, the valuing of tutors, and the appointments of experienced, stable tutors as opposed to ongoing monthly changes in PMAs, TAs, etc., that we're experiencing is quite honestly going to make the difference as to whether we're able to produce quality student experiences for large undergraduate classes. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Okay, that was great. I really loved the insights that you gave. And in the interest of time, I want to engage with the points, but I know that I have to move to the next question. But Donnie, if I may, I just wanted to, if I can just jump on the part where Ellen spoke about the assumption of independent study and how that is actually part of the facilitation of transition from high school to university. And how, for me, I'm seeing that we often speak about transition in, orientation, in means of orientation and things like student advising, but the transition also needs to be embedded into the curriculum and the design of the course. So I don't know if I should, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I think it's something that we need to think about when we think about transition, to be like more of a holistic thing, and maybe having, again, speaking to policy that has where we somehow embed transition, and maybe we could discuss it during Q&A. But I really did, I think as an academic advisor, that point really stuck out to me. So I'm going to move to the next question, and that's for Richard, Richard Cook. And the question is, how does your chapter contribute to the notion of student-centeredness, and why did you adopt the approach that you did?
Tapiso, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be part of this conversation and the broader conference. Thank you very much for the opportunity, colleagues. Perhaps a little background, as Lynn gave as well, to our chapter. Colleagues, I am a family physician. I'm a clinician in the district health space, and I head up the Department of Family Medicine and Primary Care. And I'm deeply involved in the undergraduate curriculum and postgraduate curriculum, principally of our clinical students, of our medical students historically. But I'd like to just speak to two exemplars that give some more context of the challenges that we're dealing with at the moment, that relate to the hows and whys of student-centeredness. The first is an email that I received on Monday that was a concern, if not a complaint, raised by a student and parents around the number of assessments that they are having to do in their first year of medicine this year, in a particular course which is called Person, Family and Community. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The second context that I want to raise is at the other end of the spectrum, from first year right to the specialist training, is how we are currently moving with regards to specialist pediatricians, specialist surgeons, to a reframing of our MED, our specialist curriculum, which is around not looking at competency-based medical education alone, traditionally around knowledge, skills, attitudes, but rather looking to whether we can take what is known as a rich entrustment decision, not looking retrospectively to where the student has come from to this point, knowledge, skills, and competencies, or attitude to this point, but rather looking forward to whether we can entrust an individual to do the job. Now, with respect to the latter, that certainly, and this speaks really to the why we've wanted to look so carefully at student-centeredness. The latter example speaks to the partnership between a student, be it a postgraduate or undergraduate, and faculty or clinicians in this context, or clinician faculty, should I say. Because it's through that partnership that we'll be able to engender a sense of trust in the training and assessments that we do. And of course, a key fundamental contextual element, again, to the training and assessment is that it's workplace-based in both our undergraduate training and in our postgraduate training. And there's an authenticity to being in the clinical space and looking to workplace-based assessments of a formative nature that principally that allow us to then adopt something of a programmatic assessment with multiple points of low stakes assessment through a rotation or through the year that then we can give feedback on, and students can then improve to a point of having to do a final exam that then carries a lower weighting accordingly. Now back to the first year, we recognize that with respect to all our health science students across the faculty, we need to engender a sense of partnership with our students from those early years in the typically non-clinical space, to allow us to then scaffold and spiral that very metacognitive skills and others to be able to build that into the clinical environment. Now, to do so in the context of medicine as the undergraduate curriculum is a tricky place to be, and it's quite a political space, quite a contested space with respect to disciplines and the like. So we needed proof of concept, as it were, to bring in some more innovative teaching pedagogies, more innovative approaches that we could then bring across to medicine. So 2018, we introduced a health system science track to the Bachelor of Health Sciences within my department. I must give a big nod to the and thanks to CLTD in this regard for some seed funding to get started on a blended learning model in the health system sciences track 1, 2, and 3, and then now we've developed an honors as well. So health system science, not clinical sciences, not biomedical sciences, but health system sciences, looking at the 21st century skills, competencies that are required to understand systems thinking, complexity theory of the health system. So identifying the health managers of the future, you might put it. But across all of it, it's very much cross-cutting skills that all our health science students need related to health system science. So we developed that, and we developed some student-centered approaches. And it's only now this year that we've now, for the first time, successfully pioneered a first-year course in our medicine program around health system science and in medical and health humanities as well. And our approach within therefore health system science in the Bachelor of Health Systems, Bachelor of Health Sciences, and in the medical program respectively, have looked at really a triumvirate of learning excellence, deep and meaningful learning, and student context, and student needs and diversity. And learning excellence is really speaks to our culture in this department, whereas the 3 C's, learning excellence is the culture, deep and meaningful learning is the curriculum and the journey of the student, and the student needs is really the context to understand the diversity of our students. We have piloted a number of different pedagogical approaches with some bumps in the road, with learning as we go, with recognizing with all humility that we're not necessarily we didn't get this right at the beginning, and COVID hit and the like, although that helped us in the with respect to the blended learning options, certainly. But we introduced an e-portfolio that we're now looking to have for our medical students as well, that allows the students to look at reflect in a self-directed manner on their own learning. We use the I, we, it model, reflecting on themselves, on their team of students and faculty, and the it with respect to the system and their understanding of health system science. We use descriptor analysis and reflection as another model. And then just really the sandwich model of feedback in terms of their own reflection and Gibbs reflective cycle are other tools that we use for the e-portfolio. We also look at we put in place a student curriculum review team, a SCRIT, as we commonly refer to that, to give us feedback on how we're doing and what they feel is authentic and appropriate for their learning. And then we've recognized that the students themselves benefit in a student-centered approach to student journey mapping, looking at their own touch and pain points of their educational journey through the curriculum. And we at the South African Academy, the SAHE conference, the South African Association of Health Science Educators, we spoke to, one of our students presented on the work that they've done around that particular focus. And then lastly, and Lynn mentioned this, the peer tutoring is another example of what we've also found is very helpful in terms of student-centeredness. Lastly, if I may, and then we can engage further, is that there is a couple more points, if I may. The one is that in terms of our student context, and the recognizing the diversity of our students, we are very much aware that the focus has been to date with respect to that on technology. And we've developed in the department what we've called a 5D framework, which is around digital access, data, device, direction, as in faculty to students in terms of the online or Lwazi platforms and the like, and the direction in that regard, and then diligence, which speaks to the students' engagement in and can we have strategies around each of those as a 5D framework. So lastly, then, to come back to the complaint of the student and the parent, and I was just delighted to receive it, if I might put it that way. Because it's this sort of disruption that we're trying to put in place, with a student needing to understand, and sure, perhaps we could have done better on our side in terms of communication appropriately and the like, but these assessments that they're speaking of are actually very low stakes, multiple assessments through their rotation, and they're seeing it as a big deal. But if we can just grow the culture, grow the approach of the students engaging around the need to have something of a programmatic assessment through their health system science approach or course, and indeed this is the medical student at first year that's just grappling with this shift from a focus on just the high stakes assessments and what will be assessed, and that's driving their learning, but rather having this portfolio of just small spark questions, activities online that they need to reflect on and do, so that it just enhances their learning. And so I think that hopefully with there being we can get there in terms of our adoption of this approach, and bring it right through, so that by the time we get to the medical specialist trainee, they're a little bit more equipped with some of these, the ability for us to be able to then entrust them. And that's a rich entrustment decision, as we call it, with the agency A, reliability R, integrity I, C is the classic capability or competence, and H is the humility. And if we can try to engender that at the first and second years and right the way through, then I think we'll be on the right track. So really pleased to have been able to write this chapter as a start to our journey in that regard. Sipiso, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think you guys are doing a brilliant work, and I'm hoping we'll have time to engage on how the health systems sciences, because that sounds like something that can be adapted even in other faculties. Obviously, depending on what the subject matter is, but just personally, for people for students who will be working with people, I think it's so important. It's a very important system to have, because it is a social space. It's not just the health science and the medicine that they will be focusing on, but the social impact is really it's great. And we've heard stories of when they're getting into the field, they struggle with the social aspect. There's things like language barriers. EQ is a big thing. So I think that this is a brilliant initiative, especially towards the future clinicians that you're training. So thank you for that. Okay, then the next question would be for Christine Hobden. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. And that is, what are important dimensions to consider when thinking about student-centeredness in relation to postgraduate studies? So now, yeah, we're moving into the more postgraduate space. Thanks. Over to you, Christine.
Great, thanks very much. Good morning, colleagues. So I'm based at the Wits School of Governance. And following the example, I'm going to try very briefly introduce my chapter before trying to answer the question more directly with some reflections on what perhaps is particular about the postgraduate space. So my chapter originated out of teaching public service ethics at the school in 2021 when I was new to Wits. So that I say it's reflections of fresh eyes, because it was based on a first time teaching. And here we're talking about postgraduates who are also working and around mid-career. And I had some concerns and reflections around the issue of talking about ethics when it's going to be recorded and in a context of quite a complicated ethical space in the public sphere. So I did an approach of only sharing with the students very short extracts of the class where I was perhaps giving input, and trying to frame the discussions as learning activities, not a content resource that they would keep returning to as a recording. But in order to capture and deepen the role of the discussion, I created follow-up notes that were shared with them that kind of embedded the discussion in the literature and in our kind of the course narrative as a whole. So I think some of the reflections from that tie in with what Lynn shared. I really like the term kind of the principle of explicitness. I think that was one of the takeaways for me as well, really being explicit as to what I'm doing and why, and how that's going to shape our engagement in the class. And also I like the term successful under the circumstances, because it was certainly kind of strained circumstances at the start. But I think it also gave some insights for going forward. So I focused my reflections to answer this question from my context, which is postgraduate, but it's also thinking about kind of the adult learner, often mid-career and working and studying. And I think that's valuable to Wits as a whole as we begin to, or continue to grow the postgraduate population. I think in our socio-economic context, there are going to be many students working and studying at this level. And the particular reflections I had, I think there may be three short things I would say. So I think at the postgraduate level, something I found a particular challenge, but enriching as well, is that in student-centered learning, we're trying to construct knowledge together, really give credence to the knowledge and experience the student brings into the classroom. And particularly in my experience, the students bring in a lot of their experience. If they're mid-career practitioners, they've had a lot of different experiences in the space. And we're trying to bring in at a postgraduate level quite a high level of academic learning. So I think the task of bringing those two together is something that's particularly challenging and rewarding at a postgraduate level. Trying to facilitate the students to filter through their experience, find the relevant ones, and bring that into encounter with kind of theory and research. So we get that kind of beautiful moment where theory and practice illuminate each other. Of course, that can happen at undergraduate level as well, but for me, shifting into postgraduate teaching, that's been a particular dimension to focus on. And related to that, something my chapter focused on more particularly is, I think, because students are perhaps already within their careers, perhaps established within particular institutions, particular roles, the stakes of certain conversations become a little bit higher. So I was in this ethics context, and I think that exacerbates it in certain ways. But I reflected on the ways in which, if you already have made certain choices, if you're already within a given hierarchy in the public sector or in a particular institution, that might shape your willingness to participate. It might shape concerns around classes being recorded, for example, and it might shape how you interact with others in your class because of these hierarchies. So I think the working postgraduate student within a particular field brings in these other dimensions as to how to manage student engagement and how to think about, why certain students might be participating or not. And the third reflection that also shapes this kind of how and why students participate and how they're learning is the broader question of context. So I think at a postgraduate level, it's true also at undergrad, but in a particular way, I think there are demands of the job that shape who the student is when they come into the classroom, as well as their family responsibilities. And how societal context, not the stable things we know amplify things like inequality across all sorts of dimensions, but also these interjections of context. So I taught during the July riots, for example, a block, and how that shaped who was coming into the classroom and their ability to learn, as well as the pandemic, which was also a key kind of contextual factor. So I think through that, I developed some reflections of thinking about the learner as a person, the learner as a political agent, and how they come into the classroom. And we can think about the layers of that background context shaping the learning environment, I think in much more depth than perhaps we sometimes do. And I think the postgraduate context exacerbates that in certain ways, both challenging, but also kind of enriching to the learning experience. I'll stop there. I know, apologies for being a minute over my 5 minutes.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Christine. You've provided some valuable insights, especially when it comes to when we think about dealing with students who, or working rather with students who are coming from being experienced in the individual context and having to balance. It's a delicate balance, and something that we've been thinking about even in our faculty. And how do we then, from the point of entry, start preparing students, especially students who are in the management campuses, which is WPS and WSG, for the space where they're going to be interacting not just with their lecturers, but they're going to be interacting with fellow students who are also coming from, you know, their own respective industries. And it is a delicate balance, and having to, you know, manage those emotions and expectations. And I think even from a supervision perspective, Donnie can attest, like even when we are supervising master students from the management campuses, it is that push and pull to say, but I am quite experienced in my field, but you know, then we are bringing in the supervision experience. So you're constantly having to manage, and it, like I said, it's a delicate balance. And I think what you've presented, it's something that you put a lot of thought in and that you're doing well. So hopefully we'll engage further in the Q&A. So thank you for that. And then I think now we are heading into the interaction with our student. Yes, Natisha. So as Donnie had said, unfortunately, the postgraduate student could not join us. So Natisha, I'm going to ask you the last question. And it goes, how best can the university community improve student success or nurture academic success in the future? So over to you, Natisha.
Good morning to the panel and to the facilitators. Thank you so much, Tepiso. So I think just to briefly introduce myself, I'm just a final year LLB law student, and I'm also a peer advisor at the Road to Success program. So Tepiso did share the book with me, and I read chapter 13. And I think one of the quotes that stood out for me was the emergence of a student. So based on my experience as a student and the RSP work, like many of the colleagues mentioned earlier, students do struggle with the transition into university. And I think a lot of them actually don't know what it means to be a student other than just studying 24/7. So I think in terms of like how we can achieve academic success in the future and nurture that, I was thinking about academic intervention programs that could cater to, you know, the unique needs of students. Based on my personal experience as a law student, you know, like a lot of them don't know how to read a case. A lot of them don't know what to extract from a case. And many of them, like, if not until fourth year or maybe after, they don't actually know what it's like to be in an actual trial, for example, and the experience behind all of that. So I think like, you know, developing a course that can kind of like bridge that gap, not just for practical skills, but also like theoretical skills. Working with students at the RSP program, I found that, you know, the weekly workshops is so helpful because we are teaching students of, you know, small skills like how to develop which study skills and to develop. So I think that would be beneficial. And another one would be integrating like a real world experience into the curriculum, like such as maybe internships or collaborations with other industries. Like I think that would also be very helpful. And then I remember in first semester actually, we had a module called admin law, and we struggled a lot with the lecturers. We struggled with the content, we struggled with learning the content, we struggled to also get our needs across to the lecturers. And what the students actually decided to do on their own prior to the exam is we actually formed a small group and peer tutoring amongst ourselves. So a few of our learners volunteered to hold weekly online sessions where we teach each other like the case. And that actually helped a lot of us in preparation for the exam. So I think small group peer tutoring can also kind of help, you know, to support students, not just like academically, but also emotionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Natisha. That was very insightful. Thank you for giving us your honest answers. And so we're going to open up for Q&A. So some questions might be posed to you. Donnie, I don't know, do you want to facilitate the Q&A? Just before we head in there, I just want to say something that Natisha, I wanted to touch on, and it's something that Lynn spoke about, Richard spoke about, the peer support element, you know, seems to be a big theme in the arena of student support. So I think it's something that we need to keep top of mind. But yeah, I think we're going to head into Q&A. Donnie, do you want to facilitate that?
Sure, absolutely. And Natisha, I want to echo what Richard said in the chat. There is no you're not just a final year LLB student. You are a final year LLB student, and you must celebrate that because you must acknowledge your journey up to this point and where you're going from here. So colleagues, we do have a few minutes for Q&A. So I don't know if anyone has a burning question. There's been a bit of a kind of a chat going in the chat. But does anyone have a burning question or comment that they want to make, either to a panelist or to the editors, or just generally something you feel you want to share? This is your opportunity to do that. Linnell, yes, please come in.
Yeah, hi Donnie. Hi everybody. Thank you to the panelists for what you shared. It just really resonates with me in a big way. I'm in the School of Accountancy, and we have to try and we have lots of the challenges that everybody else has. I think they're just universal throughout the world, not even just in South Africa. And one of the things that I found over the years that has really, really made a big difference is first being very explicit in our teaching process. I think once you've taught something for quite a while, or you've been exposed to the discipline for a long time, a lot of your thought process is very automatic, and we leave out steps in the way as we teach. And so it's very important to make every step in that thought process explicit to the students, because often we will gloss over things because we don't even think about it. So that's one thing I think that resonated with me from especially what Lynn was saying as well. And the other thing is that as far as bridging that gap for the students because they don't come with the learning skills and strategies, and you can teach them to be self-directed without spoon-feeding them. There was something going on in the conversation that's been going since yesterday, I think. And that for me is by actually role modeling the skills and strategies specific to your discipline in the way that you lecture, the way that you tutor, the way that you consult. It comes through in everything you do. And over the years, it's not just doing it, it's actually, this is where the explicit comes in as well, is you actually have to say to the students, this is why I'm teaching like this. This is what you can get out of this if you do this, because and you can't just do it once or twice. You have to keep on saying that until they actually realize and try it out properly and get it. And so we use our tutorials in a way to try and get students to try it and encouraging them to do it differently, because they're very resistant to that kind of change. But once they experience it and they see the benefit from it, then they take it on board. But it's that whole idea of that making it explicit. So that's what I wanted to share. And thanks, I really enjoyed what everybody else shared.
Thanks, Linnell, that you make an excellent point, and one that I'll also pick up on in my summary at the end. Anyone else want to make a statement, ask a question? We have about a minute left for that. Laura, yes, please come in.
Oh, thanks, Donnie. I just wanted to make a point about explicitness. My late colleague Raji Machadishu did a study with sociology medical students, and he found that students were given the rubric, the criteria, very explicitly for an essay, and he did a survey to find out how they were reading and interpreting the rubric. And it was quite clear that very often students didn't have the assessment literacy. They didn't understand many of the terms that were tacit. They didn't know what critical thinking meant in that context. And despite the fact that those criteria were made, available, there was a whole other layer of engaging students with those criteria that he felt was missing. And I can share the article in the chat, but I feel that, perhaps just a point I wanted to make is there's not enough just to say, I've told students what to do, but I like what Linnell said as well, is to actually make your thinking and your own process of doing things clear to students, that modeling of how you do accountancy in a way. And so I think that's what he found, is that there had to be much more engagement with those criteria, and even, students negotiating and changing those as well. So it's just a point I wanted to make. I'll share the article now.
Thanks, Laura. And yes, please do that. So colleagues, yes, yeah.
I know we only have 5 minutes, but
Sure.
what Laura has just said is touching on what Natisha brought up as something that she thinks would be useful, and that is having some sort of, at the start of the student's academic journey, especially in the undergraduate space, that bridging, for lack of a better term, something that bridges students into, the tertiary space where these terms are explained, and we don't take it as we don't assume as known knowledge, because we have established that the transition from secondary to tertiary, there's a huge gap. So what Laura has just said, again, it highlights the point that Natisha, in her experience as a student, has seen that having that, even if it's like the first 2 weeks or so, before you get into the content, you find a way that even if it's embedded in the course, where it is, these terms are introduced. And I think that will also help make the student journey to be much easier.
Yeah, you make a very good point, certainly. And I think, if I understand you correctly, Tipisi, you're saying beyond that initial gateway to success orientation period, but
Absolutely.
actually into the discipline, right?
Yes, into the discipline.
And what Lynn is saying is even beyond the first year, so continuing second year, third year. So as we continue to introduce new layers and go into more depth, how are we helping our students assimilate further into their disciplinary spaces? And how does that translate into student success in the long run?
Absolutely, yes.
So colleagues, I'm going to try and summarize very briefly a few points that came out for me, and then we'll conclude. Lazarus, unfortunately, we're kind of out of time, and but we're very happy to engage with you offline, or you're welcome to use the chat. So the first thing that stood out for me was the importance of context. So context matters. We know this from the literature, but what came out here for me was context matters, but in different way for different people. So there was context in relation to disruptions. And while the example of COVID came through, we are all very aware that disruptions kind of more broadly is something that continue, whether it's something as pervasive as a pandemic, or whether it's something ongoing as kind of AI, things that disrupt what we may perceive as the day-to-day or the normal. There's also disruption in terms of contestations within a disciplinary space or within a school or a faculty. And we are, I'm sure, all aware of these tensions that sometimes come through, especially if you're trying to challenge what has been kind of the dominant way of doing things for a long time. That can be challenging. And then in terms of level of study, so kind of contextual issues around levels of study. And those are very different at undergrad or postgrad, but even different from first year to second year to third year, or different from honors to masters to PhD. And so this issue of context is absolutely crucial if we're talking student success and how we continue to make inroads in this space. Then I want to pick up on the point of explicitness, and I think the discussion has summarized that quite well. So as Laura and Lynn has spoken about explicitness within the curriculum, whether it is for the curriculum designer and the lecturer, or whether it's making to the students explicit why we are doing what we're doing in the way that we are doing it. But I also think that sometimes we assume that there is a general understanding about why we do things outside of the curriculum. So whether it's our student success or development work that we do, how are we trying to make those kinds of things explicit, and not just as individuals, but as a community, bringing in new students into that community and making them part of the community to then continue to make these kind of important student success elements explicit. The third point I want to raise, and I'm glad we've got the people in high positions in the room, is how structural elements within the institution can hamper student success work. So one example that came up was the idea of tutoring, and I think, Lynn, I think you spoke about it. And it's not just in terms of, you know, do you have new tutors every other week? It's also about sustainability of tutoring. But it goes beyond that. Much of the work that happens in the student success space outside of the curriculum is often grant funded, and grants are temporary, most of them. And when they fall away, and if there aren't mechanisms to integrate those efforts, all the work done, whether it's in a year, a 3-year or 5-year space, falls away. And so what does that mean for student success in the long run? And how are we acting and working to try and make changes to make these things structurally more sustainable? Then my second last point is just the importance of making sure that anything that is done in kind of to advance student success must be evidence informed and underpinned by theory. This space, this area is well researched. It has a wealth of knowledge and literature, both from the global context, but also from within our country. We have a very rich history of working in this space, and I feel like sometimes we are perhaps not drawing on what exists enough. Sometimes we may not know or fail to kind of get the advantage that a lot of what's been kind of done before could mean for us. And then my last point is listen to students. I mean, unfortunately, we only had one student in the panel, but we need to listen to students, because we cannot talk about student-centeredness and advancing student success if we're not listening to our students' needs, whether it's first year, second year, third year, postgrad, etc. So that's the final concluding point. And then I just want to say thank you very, very much to my co-facilitator, to the co-editors of the book, to all the authors, as well as the panelists who were here today, and Natisha for being here, and for the invitation from the Wits Conference Committee, Teaching and Learning Conference Committee, for us to come and do this. Thank you very much.